and welcome everybody to our presentation today, where we will discuss how you can maximize your Microsoft Dynamics investment by using the by implementing the asset management module. My name is Kenny Gunter, and I'm a senior consultant with Arbella Technologies. And today, what I would like to discuss with you at a high level, give you a couple of slides to discuss asset management, basically give you an overview of the functionality. And then I would like to drill into some of the key functionalities of the asset management module, show you how it is integrated into other D365 modules. Then I will go into a live demonstration of the system itself. What I will do is I will log in as different users and explain to you how certain scenarios in a typical day in the life of those users works. When we're done with that, I would like to share the Arbella quick start for asset management proposal that we have. And then we will have time for questions and answers afterwards. So to start with, many asset-intensive industries are often faced with challenges when managing their assets. Some of those questions can be, can I predict the downtime of my assets? Do I know when an asset is due to be serviced? Are too many of my repairs unexpected? In other words, looking at my planned versus my unplanned work orders that I've been doing, is it a healthy ratio? Typically I would like to have more planned work orders than unplanned work orders. Is my equipment available when I need them? So looking at the five biggest, sorry for that. I just want to switch over. Looking at the five biggest risks to any effective asset management, first of all, we oftentimes don't know what we have in terms of assets that we need to maintain. Sometimes we don't even know where they are. We can be over or under maintaining our assets. Usually when we have a new asset, we get a list of preventive maintenance tasks from our OEM or our original equipment manufacturer. They provide a list of preventive maintenance tasks that are pretty standard. But in our case, we often use assets in different conditions than what the OEM expected. In which case, we may be using, for example, the assets in more dusty or more humid conditions than the OEM prescribes. And for that, they will prescribe a certain preventive maintenance schedule, and the conditions that we use our assets are more severe, and we need to maybe do certain PM tasks more often than others. Improper operation. We often find that operators operate the assets, not as prescribed by the original equipment manufacturer. We often do not do proper risk management of our assets. We don't see what is potentially going to break. Then we may have an asset management system, but we are not fully utilizing that asset management system. It can be that there's various functionality available within the system which we simply don't use, or we're not aware of that functionality, or it's not an integrated system at all. So to that point, it oftentimes leads to scenarios where we spend fruitless expenses on our assets because we don't know where they are, we don't know when they are due to break, etc. And considering all those, it is a good idea to maybe look at a fully integrated asset management system. that will help you with your maintenance of your assets. Now, at this point, when I talk about assets, I specifically mean my engineering assets. I'm not referring to fixed assets, which is a totally different ballgame, as we know, and that happens in the finance side of things. So hopping into the overview of the system itself, looking at the maintenance and management of our assets, you will need a system where you can look at the functional locations, in other words, where those assets are located. We might have a very big plant or a very big operation with different locations, and we need to know where those assets are located so that when we send out our maintenance staff to do the work, they may need to know where it is, and the way to do that is adding the functional location of those assets. We have multi-level asset structure. So in other words, we may have a production plant with various locations, and in those locations, we have multiple assets, and some of those assets can literally be a parent asset broken down into all kinds of children assets. Let's take a truck as an example. You may have a truck. The truck may have an engine. It may have a drivetrain. It may have tires, etc., that you want to manage as individual assets, but you also want to show where those assets are installed. In other words, you have the parent and the children installed. So you can set up multi-level asset structures using the asset management module. Needless to say, you need to keep an asset register to show all those assets. We want to know what spare parts we need to maintain our assets. We need to set up maintenance schedules, and those maintenance schedules are typically the preventive maintenance tasks that needs to be executed on our assets. Looking at the maintain side of our assets, we want to be able to do breakdown maintenance. That's something that happens so often. So we need to be able to do breakdown maintenance, create work orders, and fix that asset as quickly as possible. Preventive maintenance, we need to set up those PM schedules so that we can schedule them in advance to make sure that our assets are maintained as and when it is required. When we keep good records of our maintenance, we do good feedback in the system, we'll be able to do proper analytics and look at KPIs of our assets. When we create work orders, albeit breakdown or preventive work orders, we may want to set up checklists so that the technician that is sent out to do the work can use that checklist and make sure that the proper tasks are executed in the correct sequence. Additionally, there is a functionality to add fault maintenance. So you can do fault analytics downstream. And by adding the fault management functionality within your asset management, you can record all those faults that were detected and what was done to repair those faults. Budget and cost control. We want to see how much we spend on a particular asset at any time of its life cycle. We want to be able to see how much we budget, for example, on a work order and how much we actually spend. When we talk about preventive maintenance, we want to be able to schedule our work using a schedule board. It's a graphical representation of when work is scheduled for what asset and perhaps by whom it is to be done. We want to be able to send our technicians out using perhaps a tablet or their mobile phone, go and do what needs to be done on that asset, and on their phone or tablet, do the feedback on the work order. They might be able to look on their tablet and see which checklists are available so that they, again, know what needs to be done. We want to keep full history of our assets. The reason for that is obviously we want to see when something broke, when it was installed into a different location perhaps, what was the asset counter when a specific work order was done. And then we can also set up maintenance routes. Now, a maintenance route, also known as a maintenance route, is typically where we may have a plant or a production facility where our engineering staff need to go out and do a lubrication route. Some of these lubrication routes are done weekly, for example, on a Monday. But again, you know, it's a huge plant, and for each route that we have or the round that we have, there may be numerous assets involved, and we do not want to create a work order for each individual asset. So we set up routes and create a single work order, and that work order will contain all your assets that needs to be checked during whatever the route is. Now, all of this, the asset management and maintenance, sits on top of your Microsoft Dynamics D365 system. And as you can see here, it integrates into the financial system. Oftentimes, we may have an engineering asset that is also a fixed asset, so we will have that integration into the two systems. Not only do we have integration to fixed assets and finance, but also to the supply chain. We may have limited access to field service. All of this sits on, you know, a Power Platform, and there's a common data service that we have all on top of Microsoft Azure. Looking a little bit deeper into the integration, where we have asset management in the middle, and I'm going to start at the top there and move clockwise to the end. With asset management, whenever we create a new work order, as an example, a new project is created, so that whatever cost we have or any cost that we incur on that work order rolls up to that particular project. We can also set up our assets so that they are linked to a specific project, such as a capital project, and all work that is done on that project rolls up to a single project. There is integration to inventory and warehouse management, as well as the product information management side of D365. The reason for that is when I create a work order, I want to be able to see if I have stock to service my asset. I want to know where those items are located in my inventory and in which warehouse. There is limited integration to the production control system so that we can schedule resources. We can also get the production control feedback into my asset so that I can update my asset counters based on my production. In terms of master planning, it points back to my inventory and product master. We often need to schedule certain preventive maintenance tasks way out into the future, maybe 6 months or a year from now. The reason being is some of our spare parts that we use, or some of the assets that we use, are very expensive. We don't keep them readily in the warehouse. Some of them may have a long lead time for replenishment. So within asset management, when I create a new work order, I can plan for an item to be used way out in the future, and master planning will then pick up or see that there is a item requirement, let's say 6 months into the future, and master planning will then do its own scheduling. There is integration to the fixed asset module. We can associate an engineering asset to a fixed asset. And later I will show you how the cost can roll up from an engineering work order up into a fixed asset. Accounts payable, when we create work orders, we oftentimes have a requirement for a a purchase requisition to be generated or a purchase order. And of course, that purchase order can then be associated to my work order. In terms of the general ledger, all the postings that we have on that asset or that functional location will roll up into my general ledger, and it will hit the transactions where and how we set them up. In terms of the organization, administration, and human resources, we will set up, for example, our employees and our maintenance workers using organization, admin, and human resources to create those human resources, and then we will link them up into the asset management module as workers. I'm now going to drill into detail functions within the asset management module. So again, I have asset management in the middle, and I'm going to start at the top and move down clockwise again. In the asset management module, you will have an asset register to generate assets and maintain them. There is a sub-module for request management. Request management is like a service call where we may have anybody in the organization creating a request when they notice something is broken on an asset. It does not necessarily have to be a maintenance person. So that person can create a request, and our maintenance staff will then use those requests to determine if it's a valid request, and if it is a valid request, they will generate a work order. As mentioned, request management is not mandatory, but it's extremely useful to enable our users to use the functionality. In terms of work order management, everything related to work orders is addressed there. And it's probably the most important part of our asset management module, because this is where we will control how our assets are maintained. We will keep full history of that maintenance when we do our feedback on our work orders. There's a scheduling functionality which originates from the work order. And the scheduling function is to help us make sure whenever we have a number of work orders to be executed, that we schedule and make sure that we don't try to put, 5 haul trucks, as an example, into a maintenance scheduled day, all of them being done on the same day. We want to level that work orders so that we have a number of work to be done on day 1, day 2, etc., so that we don't push all our assets into a service on the same day. We can associate spare parts to our assets. That will just make it so much easier for the technicians when they need to do a work order. We all know that in our inventory, we have numerous inventory items, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 inventory items. When a work order is done, we don't want the maintenance technician to go into those 30,000 inventory items and filter through them to find the correct filter or spare part that is required to do the service. So what we do, we can typically use the OEM spare parts list and attach that to our asset in the asset register. When the work order is created, the technician or the maintenance planner will have the option to then look at the spare parts list, or alternatively, they can use the inventory and look through the entire inventory. Whenever we do maintenance and we do consumption, such as spare parts or labor or expenses, journals are created within the system. So we'll be able to look at the statistics in terms of those journals. When we do proper feedback on our work orders and the general maintenance on our assets, the system accumulates that data, and we can use that data as KPIs and KPI management of our assets. Needless to say, the level of detail that we do feedback on within the asset register and on our work orders and on our requests, that will determine how accurate our KPIs are. Cost control, once again, looking at budget versus actual. When we create work orders, we will have a budget for labor hours, for spare parts, expenses. So we will immediately see, what the budget is, and then once we've completed this work order, we'll be able to see what the actuals were. Did we spend and consume more spare parts than we anticipated? What can we do to prevent that? The fault management functionality, as I mentioned earlier, is really useful to have, especially for our reliability team. When we do feedback in terms of faults that we found, what was the cause of that fault? What did we do to remedy that fault? And over the years, that data, when it's put into the system, again, we can do reporting on fault management, and it's extremely useful for the reliability engineers to see what they can do to prevent certain breakdowns from happening in the future. Then in terms of general maintenance on the asset management register, thinking, maintaining the asset register itself, but also looking at items such as warranty management. You can, within your asset register, you can put in your supplier, vendor, or OEM warranty. And then when we create work orders and that work order is done within the warranty period, you will get a little flag popping up and saying, this is a warrantable asset. Do you want to continue? So all kinds of maintenance can be done within your asset register. At this point, I'm going to disable my camera so that I can go into the system and start a day in the life scenario. So if you just give me a few moments. Right, so what I've done now, I logged in as a maintenance planner, and I'm going to take you through one or two scenarios of a typical maintenance planner. When they start their day, they are interested in looking at new maintenance requests or new maintenance work orders that were created since they had their last maintenance planning meeting or in the last 24 hours. So when they log into the system first thing in the morning, what they will want to do is be able to see what are my new maintenance requests. They have the option to go into the system, click into asset management, and then go into maintenance requests, then perhaps filter on new maintenance request. And as you can gather, all of this is pretty click intensive, and we find that many customers say they really don't want to click 5 or 6 times when they can go in to a function using a single click. So to help them there, they can set up some inquiries, and I'm going to take you into the asset management module. And as you can see, the very first functionality in the asset management module, as with all the other supply chain projects, etc., there are workspaces. Currently, we have 2 standard workspaces. I'm going to click on the work order management and then show you what this maintenance planner did. Instead of going into new maintenance request, they went in, they clicked on the maintenance request, they set up an inquiry, and they created a workspace for new maintenance requests. If I click on my new maintenance request, you can see all maintenance requests that are regarded as new. They'll be able to see when this job was started or when this request was created, what asset it was for over a year, and they'll be able to see what type of request it is. And from here, the maintenance planner will be able to review, see if there's any duplicates. And if there's no duplicates, they can then decide to create a new work order. Typically, what we will do is we will enable the maintenance planner to create a new work order. We will not enable anybody else that is not maintenance related to create a new work order. So there are some checks and balances to make sure that unnecessary work is not created. Also, when the maintenance planner decides that this is a valid maintenance request, they can decide to create the work order, but there's another check that's put into the system. So I'm going to hit create new work order, and you will see I get an error message telling me that I cannot create a work order because the asset lifecycle state does not allow creating work orders. So how does that work? Within lifecycle states in D365, and typically in this case maintenance request as well as work orders, we have certain setups in those requests where we can prevent or allow certain actions to be taken, such as in this case, create a work order is set to no in the lifecycle state. I'm just going back to my request. So ultimately, my maintenance planner will have to update this maintenance request. And we set up a list of state sequences to adapt to our business processes. In this case, we create a new maintenance request, and the next step will be to put it over into in progress. And at this point, I am able to create a work order. I'm going to move over to the work orders to show you what our work orders look like. So this is a grid view of all work orders. When we created a new work order of the maintenance request, the maintenance planner will typically go into that work order. They'll be able to view the detail, such as the asset that needs to be maintained at this point in time, where the functional location or where it's installed on a functional location. Lots of other detail is available. If I click on the work order tab in the top there, you'll be able to see any related work orders to this one, or you can set up a related work order for this particular work order. When the work is done, or when we need to add work order job notes, we'll be able to add those notes. Typically, it could be the worker's remarks, or we can create internal notes. And at this point, I'm just going to move that down and go back to the work order screen. So we can also see tools required, maintenance checklists that are required to do a specific work. For this particular work order, we don't have anything, and I'll show you in a bit, what work orders we have that contains maintenance checklist. You can have the asset faults added to a work order. So I mentioned that earlier. You can add a fault. Excuse me, I'm on the wrong place there. I just need to move up a little bit. You can add an asset fault symptom, fault areas, fault types. All these can be pre-configured by you as a business. If there's any condition assessment activities that needs to be done on this work order, that will be available there. Asset counters, you can update your asset counter over here. And then, of course, we can add forecast hours and forecast items to my work order. If you know how many hours will be required for this job, you can add them over here. If you know what the spare parts are, you can add them over here. If you don't know, they can be added at a later stage. Ultimately, once the maintenance planner is satisfied that this work order contains all the detail that they need, they will update the work order state to the next state. Whatever it may be, the system will default to your current state. And they can then, at that point, dispatch this work order or schedule the work order. Typically, when you dispatch a work order, you can set the scheduled hours over here. You can schedule, set when the time, the scheduled start time is, when the end time is, and you can associate or allocate this work to a specific worker. Oftentimes, we need to print the work order so that we can hand it over to the maintenance technician. And something that we found in previous implementations is whenever we do an implementation, there is usually a standard maintenance report, maintenance work order report. And on site, once we deploy, we find that our customers say, well, I don't only need these standard fields on my report, I need another field for this or for that. So Microsoft listened to what you required, and now you can customize your own work order report by enabling certain functionalities, such as if there's a specific work order pool involved, you may say yes or no. If you need an asset image to be printed with the work order, the address, asset counters, if there's any notes. So if you scroll down this list, you'll see there's a huge number of functionality that you can enable to be printed on your work order. I'm going to another work order and filter on one of the work orders here, number 37 perhaps. Oh, I am in the wrong view. Let me just disable my view. Good. Just looking at this work order, and on the right-hand side over here, you will be able to see related information to that work order. What I mentioned earlier, you can associate work order pools. You can budget your forecast hours. You can see how many hours you actually schedule to do this work. And ultimately, when the work order is posted, how many hours you posted. So you can look at the forecast cost, such as hours and items. And then by the time when the work order is completed and posted, you'll be able to view what was your actual costs and as opposed to, for example, your budget costs. At this point, I'm going to log in as a maintenance manager to show you how they typically set up your preventive maintenance work orders. So the maintenance manager or your data administrator will set up your preventive maintenance work. So they will go to preventive maintenance and hit maintenance plans. And this is where we will set up those maintenance plans. As you can see, some of our maintenance work orders or our PMs can be based on counters, and some of them can be calendar based. So the example that I have here is a 5,000, 10,000, 15 and 50,000 can be miles, it can be operating hours, it can be kilometers. And then we also have, in this case, a time-based work PM, for example, for a weekly safety meeting, for a weekly safety PM. I can also set up PMs based on counters where we can say, well, if, for example, the heat or the temperature on a specific asset reaches above a certain temperature or below, we will want the system to generate a work order so that we can fix that issue. So these setups can also be done using your PM list. I mentioned maintenance routes earlier, or rounds. This is where we will set up, for example, a lubrication route, and we will associate all the assets that should be included in this work order when we do the maintenance route. Once our maintenance plans are set up, you will run your maintenance schedule. You can run them daily, weekly. You can set them up to be automatically scheduled. And once the maintenance schedules are run, you will go into your open maintenance schedule lines, and you'll be able to see which work orders are scheduled for your specific assets. In this case, we can see, well, we have a couple of overdue work orders sitting there, and we may want to reschedule these work orders. So I can select those work orders and adjust my schedule accordingly to change the expected start date to something in the future or today's date. So you have various flexibility options in this case. Once you are happy that your expected start dates are correct and in line with what your expectations are, you can generate work orders. So when you select multiple schedule lines, as an example, you can click on work order, and then you can decide, do I want to create a single work order per line? Do I want one work order per, for example, asset type, or per asset, or a functional location? Again, this flexibility is entirely up to you on how you generate your work orders. I'm going back into the system as a maintenance scheduler, because once we've created these work orders, we will want to go into the work order system, open the work orders, and as a maintenance scheduler, I will want to look at the new PMs that were created, and I will want to start the scheduling process. Again, as you can see, we have a whole lot of work orders sitting here, and for my maintenance scheduler, it's sometimes not easy to filter through all these new work orders. So they can typically create a new filter over here, and they will want to only look at the new preventive maintenance work orders. One step better, actually, what they can do is, once they've created this filter, they can go over and add it to their workspace. So they can hit configure, and they can say they want to add a new tile, and the tile name can be new PMs, as an example. Okay. Once the scheduler have all these PMs that are newly created available, they will have to decide, which of these they want to move into a new status or a new state. They will go over and update the work order state. And once those work orders are in a new state, such as, for example, released, they will be able to start their scheduling process. So I'm going to break this filter real quick. And maybe just go to a work order that has been released. Doesn't really matter which one I'm taking here. I just want to show you what our scheduler will typically do. The scheduler will look at the work. They will look at the details of, for example, when this work is scheduled to start. If it's not scheduled yet, they will obviously do the scheduling themselves. So they will, again, hit the dispatch button and dispatch it out to the appropriate maintenance worker. Once that is done, they have the option to go into the scheduled maintenance workers, we have a Gantt that we can use to look at a specific time period. Let's just use the next 2 or 3 days. I will hit apply, maybe just collapse all of them real quick. And in this Gantt, you'll be able to see which work is scheduled on a particular day. And if we see, for example, this is a very busy day, I can go down into the detail of this work order, see, well, Bill is maybe not, available today, and I can take his work and move it over to a day that he is available. And as you can see, it sounds like I lost audio connection. I trust you can still hear me. Moving away from the Gantt, what I want to show you, perhaps, earlier I mentioned when we dispatch a maintenance technician, it is always useful for them to know when they go out to do the work, where that asset is located. I mentioned functional locations. We can set up functional locations that are really simple. Typically just have your default location with the assets installed. We can have it a little bit more complex. Looking at this particular functional location, you'll see there's a number sub locations. If you click on a sub location, you'll see that there are assets installed. Oftentimes we have a sub location that is really complex. It has a number of locations, and within those locations, they may have an asset, and that particular asset may even have its own sub-assets. So when I send a technician out to, for example, PP0201, they will know exactly that they need to go to the extrusion line. Going back to the asset register once again. I mentioned integration into the fixed assets. And an example that I have here is this asset sits in my engineering asset register, but you will see there is a link to the fixed asset register as well. This is not mandatory. We don't have to associate all our engineering assets to fixed assets. So in the case where we have done it, we can click on that asset number and you'll see it brings me back to my asset management or my fixed asset functionality. And this is where, if we did any work on the engineering asset, we'll be able to view all the costs that were incurred during work orders on this fixed asset. So all those costs will roll up to your fixed asset register. Going back to our workspaces, I'm going to go into the asset management workspaces. You will also find that outside of the tiles that you can manually create, there's a huge wealth of analytic information. And that's why I mentioned earlier, when you do feedback using the system, be sure to do accurate feedback. Do as much feedback and as accurate as you possibly can. The reason for that is the system will use those feedback into your analytics. For example, this one is work order insights. I'm going to see if I can make it a little bigger for you, for your display, perhaps. It's a little sketchy. I hope you can, at least you can see that there are certain analytics shown here in little blocks, and you are able to, and I'll expand one in just a moment. But what is important to us as maintenance management is, you'll be able to see, for example, analytics in terms of your planned work versus your unplanned work. And typically we will want to see that our planned work is much more than our unplanned work. it will give you statistics such as, did you know that gen number 1 is the most frequent asset that is repaired? And it will give you a ton of other detail. You'll be able to drill down into these analytics to see which are the work orders or the assets that has been maintained the most. I'm going to speed up a little bit, show you that there's a wealth of reporting capabilities, such as inquiries. You can drill down into specific inquiries for assets and asset faults. You can generate specific reports. I'm just going to hit one report here, which is the asset fault, which I mentioned earlier. You'll see that when you feedback faults, there's a lot of information that is displayed. But what is really nice to see is you also have an analytic capability where it gives you a graphical representation of those fault symptoms, fault areas, fault types, causes, and the remedies that you did. And you can drill down into the detail. These detail is what you as a business will set up. So, it's not what we present, it's something that you can decide where you want to manage your fault symptoms, etc. I'm now going to step out of the live system and go back to the presentation. The reason for that is with the GoToMeeting, I cannot share my phone, my mobile device. So what I did is I prepared a number of slides to show you what the mobile device will look like. So when I log into the system as a mobile user, I'll be able to view my menu. I can perhaps look at all my maintenance work orders. I can search on a work order, and once I find the work order that I need to do work on, I can select the line and look at the detail of what I need to repair. In this case, it is asset number 1, and it sits on functional location PP0201, so I know where to go to. I can look at attachments, or I can add attachments such as pictures. If there's a checklist, I'll be able to view the checklist. Under normal circumstances, when a mobile user goes out, they will update the work order lifecycle state. So it could be in a release state, and I can put it into an in-progress state. I can also look at what tools I am required to use for my work. I can look at the asset counters. I can add notes, downtime, etc. Typically, when a job is done, we will want to look at the asset counters and maybe update my asset counter. So I'll be able to view the history on my asset, and then in terms of the counters, and then I'll be able to update my asset counter myself. And the next step is I can do feedback on my work order. So the maintenance worker will then be able to do whatever feedback it is that is required on their work order. And ultimately, they will be able to do the feedback and status updates on those work orders. I really ran real quick through the presentation. There is so much more that we can show you and that we can discuss. And I would really encourage you to use the opportunity going forward to touch base with us, maybe to look into a more detailed presentation or an overview of the functionality. What I would like to do right now at this point in time is switch over and discuss the Arbella Quick Start for Asset Management offering that we have. We drafted these Quick Start offerings to help you as a business. First of all, if you are interested in using the functionality, the asset management functionality, you may be limited on budget, you may be limited on time. We have certain offerings that we want to show you. So first of all, what is the purpose of the Quick Start functionality? What we want to do is help you improve your asset reliability through reducing unplanned maintenance, reduce your downtime through effective maintenance. That is really what the core is of planned versus unplanned maintenance. The target industries is really anybody that is managing assets, especially industries with asset-intensive industries, including companies such as manufacturers, mining, you name them. And of course, those clients that currently use Excel spreadsheets, or they are using legacy non-intelligent applications for asset management. We often get on a site where they literally use spreadsheets and Word documents to manage their assets. So they don't have maintenance scheduling capability. So those are the targets that we want to encourage to use these offerings that we have. The benefit of these offerings is that we have 3 implementation offerings with fixed time frame and fixed fees at very low risk. We endeavor to resolve your asset management issues the first time and every time. And then, of course, we want to empower your frontline maintenance workers with mobility. The 3 offerings that we have is, as you can see at the bottom left here, there is a 30, a 60, and a 90-day install, which are included in the quick start. There is also a regular implementation, where maybe you have so many assets and so many maintenance activities that we need, for example, a 6-month or a 1-year implementation. But for the quick start, the 3 offerings is really on the 30-day offering, we have an essentials where we will help you implement the basic functionality. We will provide you with templates, for example, for work order types, etc., work order states, so that you don't have to go out there and determine what are my work orders, work order types, etc. And through the 30 days offering, we will implement the basics. We call it essentials, and then on the 60 days, we have this the standard functionality, which includes everything in essentials, but also more functionality, where we will typically include scheduling, dispatching functionalities. And then ultimately, we have the 90-day offering, which really includes everything and much more, where we can even look at fault management. We can look at IoT capability, so that the IoT can write back to your assets if something is broke or running too hot, etc. So what we will typically do, if you are interested and you approach Arbella for these quick start offerings, Arbella will sit with you and we will do an assessment of your current maintenance practice. We will typically look at the amount of assets, the complexity of your assets. We will look at the setup of your PMs. And based on all the input that we get from you as a business, we will make recommendations in terms of, is it a 30, a 60, or a 90-day fit? And based on that, we can engage and start with an implementation. And of course, all of these assessments are free. The 30, 60, and 90 days will be done at a fixed fee. Arbella IP is free. Obviously, there's a few conditions, such as assuming the setup is basic, and for the most, the remote delivery is part and parcel of the deal. With COVID nowadays, we need to be able to do remote delivery, and that is what we can do. So with that, I want to leave you with perhaps a final thought. What it says here is, if you don't schedule time for maintenance, your equipment will schedule it for you. And we all know if there's a breakdown, it usually comes at the most inconvenient time for you and for your business. So using a proper maintenance management system, we can prevent this from happening. With that, I would like to thank you. And I see we have about 2 minutes remaining. If there's any questions that you may have, please feel free to ask them, and I'll be happy to try and answer them for you.